They told no one. No consent was given. No warnings were issued. No mercy was shown. What if the people who were supposed to protect you were the very ones running the experiment on you? Somewhere, buried deep in the sealed files of history, lies a truth so disturbing that governments worked for decades to keep it hidden. A truth that turns your stomach. A truth that forces you to question everything you believe about science, power, and human decency. Because this was real. Real people. Real suffering. Real scientists in white coats who watched and documented while human beings were left to deteriorate, not because they had to, but because someone decided the data was worth more than the lives. The victims didn't know they were part of an experiment. Some never found out. And the men who designed it? Many of them walked free, received awards, shook hands at conferences, died peacefully in their beds. This is not a fiction. This is not a conspiracy theory. This is a chapter of history so dark, so forbidden, that it was buried under layers of bureaucracy, sealed documents, and government silence for nearly 4 decades. You are about to learn what they never wanted you to know, and once you do, you will never look at the word science the same way again. The year was 1932. The place, Macon County, Alabama, a region gripped by poverty, racial inequality, and broken promises from a government that had failed its most vulnerable citizens time and time again. The United States Public Health Service launched what they called a study. On the surface, it appeared to be a medical program, a gift, almost, to a community that had almost no access to health care, free meals, free medical examinations, free burial insurance. The men recruited were black sharecroppers, poor, trusting, desperate for help they had never received before. They were told they were being treated for bad blood, a vague, local term for a range of ailments. They were not told the truth. They were never told the truth, because bad blood was syphilis, and the treatment was never coming. The researchers didn't want to cure them. They wanted to observe them, to watch, in real time, what syphilis did to the human body when left completely untreated. From the first sores to the final stages, neurological collapse, blindness, madness, death. And here is the moment that should stop you cold in your tracks. In 1947, 15 years into the experiment, penicillin was confirmed as a safe, effective cure for syphilis. It was widely available. It could have ended their suffering overnight. The researchers knew this. They withheld it anyway. What the Tuskegee Syphilis Study revealed was not simply medical negligence. It was a deliberate, orchestrated, government-funded campaign of human suffering, hidden behind the language of science and the legitimacy of official letterheads. 399 black men with latent syphilis were enrolled in the study. 201 control subjects without the disease were included. None of the infected men received proper treatment. Not a single dose of penicillin. Not one honest conversation about what was being done to their bodies. They were actively deceived. When the men were called up for World War II, and local draft boards tried to send them for syphilis treatment, the researchers intervened, personally contacting the boards to have the men removed from treatment lists. Let that sink in. These scientists didn't just withhold the cure. They fought to make sure other institutions couldn't provide it either. Some of the men infected their wives. Some of their children were born with congenital syphilis, a condition passed from mother to child that causes bone deformities, blindness, deafness, organ failure, and death in infancy. Here is the jaw-dropping moment that redefines everything. The study was never meant to last 40 years. The original plan was for 6 to 8 months, but the scientists kept extending it, year after year, decade after decade, because the data was so valuable, because no one stopped them, because the system, the very system designed to protect people, was the one enabling the harm. By the time a whistleblower named Peter Buxton finally leaked the details to the press in 1972. 28 men had died directly from syphilis. 100 more had died from related complications. 40 wives had been infected. 19 children had been born with congenital syphilis. The study ran for 40 years, and for most of those 40 years, nobody outside those sealed rooms knew. When the story finally broke on July 25, 1972, published across the front pages of newspapers, from New York to California, the public reaction was one of collective horror. The study was immediately terminated. But termination is not the same as accountability. A class action lawsuit was filed on behalf of the survivors and the families of the deceased. In 1974, the U.S. the government agreed to a settlement of $10 million paid out to the surviving men and the heirs of those who had died. For some families, that settlement arrived too late. Their fathers, grandfathers, and husbands were already gone. In 1997, 25 years after the story broke, President Bill Clinton stood in the White House and delivered a formal presidential apology to the 8 remaining survivors of the Tuskegee Study. He called it deeply, profoundly, morally wrong. But here is why this still matters today. The Tuskegee Study didn't just destroy individuals, it destroyed institutional trust. Studies show that awareness of Tuskegee is directly linked to lower rates of health care, participation, lower vaccination rates, and deep medical mistrust among Black Americans. A mistrust that is entirely rational, given what history has proven possible. The consequences of those 40 years are still alive in communities right now, in hesitation at a doctor's office, in a hand that pauses before signing a consent form, in a generational wound that no apology, however sincere, has fully healed. The men they experimented on did not vanish into the past. Their silence was forced, but their story, once exposed, became one of the most powerful arguments for medical ethics, informed consent, and the protection of vulnerable populations in the history of modern science. History doesn't bury itself. People bury it. Institutions bury it. Power buries it, and it stays buried until someone, one person, with enough courage and enough conscience, decides that the truth matters more than the comfort of silence. Peter Buxton was that person, and because of him, we know. Because of him, laws were changed. Because of him, the National Research Act of 1974 was passed, creating the ethical frameworks that protect every patient who enters a clinical trial today. But the lesson of Tuskegee is not simply about one study. It is about what happens when we allow science to exist without conscience, when we allow power to exist without accountability, when we decide that some lives are worth less than a data set. That lesson does not belong to 1932 or 1972. It belongs to right now. If this story disturbed you, if it made you think, if it made you angry, if it made you feel something, leave your thoughts below. And if you believe this kind of hidden history deserves to be heard, stay close. Because there is so much more the world was never meant to know.